And if shout if it's too loud or it's not loud enough. Shai, I think you were maybe a little bit quiet, but you might have been closer. So we're just going to dive first into the most obvious question. I actually was fortunate enough to back Martin at Centrifuge like quite a while ago, and it does feel like we've been kind of close to dawn for RWAs for about a decade. And so we just wanted to peel back, why has that been the case? What has changed right now? And we're going to get into stables in a second. So who wants to take that first one?
I can take it. I think the first thing which was missing was really kind of, a unit of exchange, stablecoins. Stablecoins took up. And the second thing was basically that's perfect storm. DeFi yield went down, TradFi yields went up. Everyone was looking for investment opportunities on-chain. And then BlackRock came in, started with tokenizing T-bills, and it was most likely the first time RWAs had some kind of product market fit. And that from there, I think both sides, DeFi, TradFi, understood the opportunity better. More and more talent moved into the DeFi space, traditional finance knowledge, I think, and also that was really establishing those great partnerships we are seeing now taking off. And look at us here, what a mixed panel, So that is a perfect reflection where we are at the moment.
I would maybe add to that and say, to your point, the concept of tokenization is not new. The last time tokenization was popular, it used to be called not RWAs but STOs. And why this time is different is I think a lot of the reasons why that were just outlined. But I think in like 2021, 2022, we had rates in the real world going up that coincided with like kind of a crypto winter and a lot of capital flowing off chain into quote unquote the real world, which really put a spotlight and a need to bring real yield on chain to kind of keep that capital kind of circulating in the on-chain DeFi ecosystem. In addition, we had the advent of DeFi and DeFi capabilities, which showed that you can actually create utility to assets once they are tokenized. So you can actually do stuff with these assets, including the advent of stablecoins and digital dollars to be able to kind of transact with those things. So another thing that kind of existed now is institutional grade infrastructure. In addition to stablecoins, we had custodians, on and off ramps, tokenization platforms, compliance capabilities. So all of these things together kind of coalesced. Plus, you had large traditional financial services executives, Larry Fink from BlackRock, everyone likes to tout, but a lot of others that were not just touting the future as tokenization, but they were actually doing stuff. So I think all of these things kind of coalesce to really put a spotlight on this space. And obviously there's a lot of things that have been happening more recently to demonstrate that adoption is growing. And so I think for that reason, like it's definitely here to stay, and this time is definitely different.
Yeah, and we all know, especially in our space, things can be highly reflexive. Once it gets going, the network effects kick in. I use the metaphor of this is the thin end of the wedge, and I was asked to explain what I meant. And I mean that when you put the wedge into the log, and you get the first a little bit, and then you can crack it wide open. And I do feel that's what's about to happen to the capital markets. But Nelli, do you want to talk a little bit more about where we've got to with stable coins, the Genius Act, and deposits, I think, which is a play that you're doing at JP Morgan?
Sure, I'd love to. So first, I think important to give credit where it's due. I do think stablecoins are extremely necessary and kind of the backbone for growth in this space.
A little bit closer, I think.
Closer, further.
Yeah. Don't be shy.
Okay. Because anytime you're trying to grow a market, obviously people need a way to pay for it. And I do think stablecoins have done a lot for the growth of the sector. Folks like me who work at banks now are trying to think about, I think RWAs have a very strong role to play in capital markets because I see a lot of efficiency in what they're doing, right? In both how they can provide fast, efficient, well-matched and data-driven capital distinctions. But I want to attract maybe a different client set than the one that's using stablecoins, right? So that's where we come in with the institutional efforts on payments. And that's why we've taken pains with our products that we have at Connexus. So we have something called blockchain deposit accounts, which we're synchronizing to public asset infrastructure so that our clients can get, the best of both worlds. And then we more recently issued our deposit token on Base a couple of weeks ago. And the way we see this playing out is that there's a whole subset of untapped liquidity right now that needs some ease, I think, into the rails that they can use to be a part of this ecosystem, which will ultimately benefit them, and a nice solid way to on and off ramp into like the banking system that they're familiar with. Again, I totally recognize, I think this is a totally different user set than the one that's been historically engaged, but I think the entire ecosystem overall will just benefit from more and more sources of liquidity, more interested parties.
And I think it's like well understood, Trump, like him or loathe him, Genius Act has been a major unlock for the space. I can certainly attest to the fact that in the UK, amongst other places, the level of awareness of the power of tokenization from stables to many other assets is very high. And now the announcements we've just had from Robinhood on the back of the Kraken's capabilities are pretty exciting. Nonetheless, in this last decade, a lot of people have described tokenization as being a little bit kind of like a nothing burger, almost like, so what if it's tokenized? What does that do? Does that mean there's just a bit more liquidity, a few more people can access it? Is that all there is to the story? You and I, Shai, were tackling that backstage.
Yeah, so like I said, I think that just tokenizing by itself it's a nothing burger, right? So you tokenize the stock, it still inherits all the inefficiencies of, let's say, a stock or a real world bond. And so long, theoretically you can trade it 24/7. Theoretically, you have self-custody, but effectively it's backed by some custodian that's really holding the RWA, and it can really effectively be settled 9/5 and not 24/7. So I think that what is most interesting and what is most appealing is the appetite of traditional actors to actually make this extra step, right? Because as long as this doesn't exist, as long as there are only what I call the DeFi folks pooling the RWAs, it's not going to work. It has to come from a point where someone understands, has enough appetite to harness these advantages in order to take the lead. And I also wanted to say that stablecoins, the way I'm looking at it, stablecoins and other securitized assets are really two different use cases. So I'm not sure if it's...
Why is that?
I think that stablecoins, especially in the context of payments, they have the classic store of value attribute as opposed to an investment vehicle. So I think the current tokenized MMFs excite me much more than just stablecoins. I don't think BUIDL and Benji are just stablecoins. I think they're a new type of thing. In traditional finance, they will not be considered to be dollar equivalents. They're actually investment vehicles, right? And this is much more exciting than just a tokenized dollar that you can use for payments. Again, I do think it's very exciting, but in a different context, not in the context of DeFi and composability of financial assets on-chain.
I think that sort of undersells the innovation and probably doesn't appreciate the complexity of putting institutional liquidity in a format where you can actually participate in things like liquidity pools, you can participate in something like a Uniswap or even just straight DVP. And I think it's also a scaling question, right? So I love to remind people, like, we're all really excited, right? Like, your stablecoins are 200 billion. An institution like mine processes $10 trillion in payments a day. And like, if you really believe in the RWA industry, you want to unlock that liquidity as much as possible and to sort of undersell that as nothing for a potential industry that's kind of always looking for liquidity to grow and I think is in its infancy and its future really hinges on being able to introduce more liquidity. I just don't think that's accurate.
I would maybe just add to that I don't necessarily think that RWAs are mutually exclusive from stablecoins. In fact, the large majority of adoption of RWAs has been from stablecoin and yield coin issuers, buying money market funds, now CLOs and other types of assets to represent the collateral backing those yield token stablecoins. You can call them permissionless wrappers, whatever that may be, but the mechanism by which a lot of these RWAs has reached permissionless DeFi users has been through these types of crypto native institutions who are issuing different types of tokens on the back of these regulated assets. And so that's been the funnel to date. And so I feel like that's been characterizing the majority of actually the adoption of RWAs so far. I mean, Grove is a perfect example of that as part of the Sky ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, for me, looking at it, I mean, I'm not a money expert or a payments expert or anything, but coming at it from the more engineering perspective, and stablecoins are just the kind of the simplest and necessary kind of building block on the whole spectrum of RWAs. But I think also you mentioned, Nelli, I think something pretty crucial, which is once you have some kind of tokenized existing asset, let's call it that rather than an RWA, and that can be unleashed into the wild of the decentralized, landscape and operate within Uniswap or whatever, then that's when it gets pretty exciting, I think, and presents questions for exactly who's in control at that point in time. And how do you map that world to the world of KYC, AML, and so forth, or do you try and do that? I mean, I think it's a necessary step, and I think it's not just about people interacting with that world. I think it's about the machine web and machines interacting with that world going forward. So, thoughts on that?
Absolutely. So, this is very much front and center of our thought process. The short answer is you take baby steps, but the long answer is I think the new way of using something like a deposit token does present different issues than traditional payments when it comes to things like AML and monitoring, but you have a new technology that also can present different controls, right? And so something like deposit tokens 5 years ago, frankly, wouldn't be possible because we didn't have the kind of analytics resources we would need for AML monitoring on blockchain and other such tools. But I think to fully take on the technology, you have to take the risk and then look at how the technology helps you manage the new risk. And that's basically what we're doing and how we're thinking about it. And again, right now, obviously the deposit token is going to be available to our clients, and we'll work with regulators as we look at different scopes. But we have to start somewhere. I've been with the team for 7 years, and every time we do something, starting at the beginning, everyone's like, oh, that's just a baby step. But 7 years of baby steps, and you have something meaningful, and then another 7 years, and
Compounding baby steps, that's the way to go. Martin or Shai, anything?
Yeah, maybe add to that, so I don't like the term stablecoin. It's most likely kind of being born out of the fact that you wanted to have a stable unit of exchange for volatile crypto. And I would most likely say, hey, there are coins which are payment coins, basically replacing fiat on-chain, and there are others which are generating yield. And if you look at the yield-bearing stablecoins, what it actually is fixed income yield, which in form of a token distributed. And I totally agree. Hey, it's super early stage. You don't underestimate the complexity. And a lot of these issues not being solved yet, So that's where...
Which, the regulatory issues, or
that is...
risk analysis issues?
Absolutely. People don't understanding risk, etc. But what we are basically doing right now is helping traditional financial institutions exploring basically blockchain as a new distribution channel and tap into the on-chain capital and offer their investment and yield opportunities. What we do not do is really grow the pie. RWA is not helping to grow the pie. Though basically the use case, hey, we tokenizing real world assets and everyone is going on-chain. That is not about to happen, at least not in the moment. And I think that is a natural next step we need to get to, and there is a lot of things to happen actually to make that possible. So I think really one of the opportunities blockchain still have, and most of the people don't realize, but I think a few institutions already had realized, is really kind of the global south, the unbanked market. That is the real growth potential also for basically growing the pie, including for real assets. That's why Stripe has acquired a bridge, So it's basically, Mexican workers have a much better opportunity to remit their money back to Mexico without having a bank account. Hey, they do not need to go to a shop, deposit cash, go to another shop, actually get cash back in another currency and being ripped off in the middle. No, hey, they have a deposit in stablecoins on a wallet. So basically, the wallet replacing the bank account. That is a real-world use case, and you need to build products around those primitives. I think, number one. And number two is really that actually the real-world asset tokens need to get closer to a token utility crypto land is familiar with. So really atomic swaps, using it for something which is just more than, being invested and receiving yield, exactly the products you're working on, I think here these are the use cases. These are the two drivers, really give access to something people do not have access, unlock value, and the other one is really produce utility which is far beyond what traditional markets can deliver, but we are super early here, so really we do not even have efficient capital structures on-chain. Coming back to the point, so hey, yeah.
I think that the most, the best way to grow the pie will be real DeFi composability, because I think this was a great example, like the remittances, right? So you want to remit, to use blockchain for remittances, classic use case, been talked about since 2017, never really materialized in full. Why? I think one of the main reasons is that there are also missing building blocks in the middle, right? So you can send your Mexican peso, but at the other end, there is no bank to receive it. Why? Because there are no credit instruments for any institution or semi-institution to facilitate this transfer and support it. But once these financial instruments are available on-chain, this also opens up the door for other services like remittances. And that can be amazing. So I do think that with stable coins alone, it's challenging. It is an amazing step in the sense that we finally see institutional money flow. And yes, I have worked in TradFi before switching over to crypto, and I know how long processes take. But at the same time, the great unlock will come from actually using this untapped power of DeFi and blockchain technology in general that is just able to unlock instant settlements.
Can I just clarify though, just so we're not mistaken, just because something is a bank product does not mean its only utility is remittances. And I just want to read it again, my whole job, my whole life at work is to think about how we use deposits specifically for things like DVP, things like would we mimic a DeFi lending protocol, collateralized loans, fast movement of cash collateral. It's very narrow to always think of anything cash related as remittance, and it's just not true. So
I would maybe add, I think in developed markets in particular, we take for granted the concept of access. To what was said earlier, the ability for various neobanks, wealth tech platforms, and other fintechs to offer just dollar-based access to the global south, I think that in and of itself is a huge value add and value prop. And I think there's a lot of institutions, a lot of these Web 2 challengers, fintechs, are using a combination of tokenization, smart contracts, and blockchain rails to make it economically and operationally feasible for them to enter net new markets, because doing so using traditional rails just doesn't make sense from a business standpoint. So they're using the tech really as a business enabler to enter net new markets, not just crypto native, but emerging markets, global south, as a point of access in the first instance. And then from there, once you have this kind of, I don't want to say captive, but this customer base, you can start to upsell them via various DeFi capabilities, abstract it in the back end, and kind of go from there. But the point of access, I don't think, should be underestimated.
And so we're going more global, giving access to people who never had it before. And even in existing markets, you've got much greater liquidity, convenience, coverage, but also, as you say, Martin, you can tie this in programmatically into different software experiences. And ultimately, let's face it, unless you're a kind of stockbroker, you don't want to spend your time picking these things. These things should be automated, whether it's payments or whether it's, saving for your retirement, should just fade into the background. So I want you to try and sort of look forward in the sort of last 5 minutes. We seem to be rapidly moving into a world where, be it for cash or equities or more complex financial structures, we're going to be in one global 24/7, 365 automated, highly liquid, possibly decentralized trading infrastructure. So in a sense, the trading infrastructure is like going to dematerialize. And the way we interact with it is probably mainly not going to be us. It's going to be machines. So the applications themselves are going to dematerialize. And I was hearing just from earlier today, that might actually be better for regulation. You can probably get a ZK proof of a face identification on a phone and have that attested to the infrastructure and through the applications in a way you couldn't, hitherto. Who's going to be responsible for all of that if it isn't working properly? And do you agree with the vision?
Yeah, I still think whoever owns the client will accrue the value, and that will still happen at the application level. I think the technology, to your point, enables an institution to more robustly and programmatically manage compliance risk. But I think from a regulatory standpoint,
they go after the money.
You still need someone to blame.
Yeah.
And I think that will still be kind of at the application level, and which applications that is obviously TBD. But I think a lot of value will accrue to those that own the customer, and then they'll kind of offer these various potentially decentralized products, services, and capabilities abstracted into the back end, such that a user doesn't necessarily know that they're interacting with a blockchain or DeFi or whatever that may be.
Yeah, I guess I'd agree. I think there's going to be some, I'd say, application level accountability, because there's always going to be some subset of the market that doesn't feel fully comfortable not interacting with a party that they can kind of account for. But I will say I have a view that at some point there is going to be a base level of infrastructure that we sort of normalize as public utilities if this is going to go anywhere. And yeah.
Exchanges are going to get utilitized, basically. Okay, fine.
Yeah, I think we see that already evolving, that really needs permissioned use cases on permissionless infrastructure, and permissionless infrastructure actually needs really to combine that it is working, value, ownership, and context, and that means stablecoins on-chain for value, for example, KYC is again, important for ownership, etc. But these three things, you need to bring them together on permissionless infrastructure. I think that the premise for the future. I don't know where it's going. So for me, it really feels like we are most likely in the foreseeable future do not compete with traditional finance. So it's really like DeFi is building new distribution channels and liquidity beside traditional finance. And then there will be eventually a tipping point where most likely traditional finance is moving into DeFi, but I do not know when that is happening.
Any final words, Shai? Because we got a 1 minute warning.
On that, I think, pretty much covered everything.
Well, I mean, there was a comment earlier from the panel that, if we continue to push this revolution on the TradFi world, it doesn't work. It doesn't even work psychologically. But I think we're absolutely seeing the first steps of the opposite happening. They're saying, let's just have a little bit of decentralization and permissionlessness and DeFi, and let's incorporate it in our businesses because it works for them economically. And I think, as you said, Martin, the tipping point is coming soon. The genie cannot be put back into the bottle, but I think it's going to be a better place for all of that. So thanks very much to the panel for everything, their preparation. Thank you to the audience for sitting out the heat. It's Richard Muirhead from Fabric Ventures, going to have a swim. Bye.
Okay. Amazing panel. It's funny, Morgan brought up the STO thing.